Have you ever wondered how scientists get thousands of people for their studies on, human behavior? Well, in the digital age, a lot of that research has moved online, creating this sort of gig economy for science. But that shift brings up a huge question. Can we actually trust the data? Today, we're going to dive into a massive review of one of the most popular online tools out there to see if the science it produces is really reliable.
Okay, look at this number, 2,117%. That is a staggering figure, right? It represents a truly explosive shift in how scientific research gets done. But what on earth is it measuring?
Well, that number is the growth of just one single platform, Amazon's Mechanical Turk, or MTurk as most people call it. And that's just for management research in a 7-year span. It's basically an online marketplace where researchers can post little tasks like surveys for a small payment. It has become one of the fastest ways to collect data, period.
And that, right there, is the central question. MTurk's incredible growth is matched only by some really deep skepticism in the scientific community. Some academic journals have even flat out refused to publish studies that use it. So what is it? Is this a revolutionary tool for understanding people, or is it a serious threat to the validity of science itself?
To get to the bottom of all this, here's our plan. We're going to look at the initial promise of MTurk, then uncover its hidden dangers, explore a guide for how to do good science with it, and finally, wrap up with why any of this actually matters to you.
So let's start with the promise. Why did researchers flock to MTurk in the first place? Well, it really just boils down to 3 things. It's fast, it's pretty cheap, and it offers a pool of participants that's way more diverse than the usual sample of college students. And these 4 benefits created, well, a perfect storm. All of a sudden, researchers could tap into a more diverse group of people, get their data in hours instead of months, and do it all for a fraction of what traditional lab studies cost. It's really no wonder it kicked off a research gold rush. But that gold rush came with problems. This whole online gig work environment creates some pretty serious challenges for data quality. The source for this explainer actually identified 10 major perils, so let's take a look at some of the biggest ones.
First up, inattention. Think about it. Participants are often trying to complete these tasks as quickly as possible, probably with the TV on or while multitasking. The result? They're way more likely to be distracted than someone in a controlled lab. And this leads to about 15% of participants failing simple attention check questions. That's a huge chunk of any data set to be getting bad info from.
And that leads us to another huge problem, misrepresentation. To qualify for more studies and make more money, some participants just lie about their background. The data here is pretty shocking. Over a third misrepresent their income and education, and almost a quarter misrepresent their age. If you're a scientist trying to study a specific group, this can completely torpedo your results.
Okay, next is a more subtle but really critical problem called non-naivete. What does that mean? It means a small group of professional participants are completing a massive number of studies. The data shows that just 10% of these workers account for over 40% of all the tasks. They've seen all the common tricks and questionnaires before, which means they aren't the naive participants that most studies rely on.
And the impact of this is just staggering. The research shows this non-naivete can reduce a study's estimated effect size by up to 40%. In other words, a perfectly good scientific idea can end up looking like a failure just because the participants have seen it all before. And the risks just keep coming. Dropout rates are often over 30%. Malicious bots can fill out surveys with total junk data. There are online communities where people share answers and spoil experiments. And of course, participants are more likely to give the right answer, not the honest one, when there's a payment on the line.
Okay, so after all those warnings, you might be thinking MTurk is a lost cause. But the researchers who did this review, they don't think so. Instead, they argue that we just need to be a lot more careful. So they created a blueprint for better science, a set of 10 best practice recommendations for using the platform responsibly.
And they organized these recommendations into 3 simple stages: planning, implementation, and reporting. By taking specific steps at each stage, you can really cut down on the risks we've just been talking about. So, for example, during the planning phase, you don't want to post an ad that says managers wanted, because that just encourages people to lie. The best practice is to run a separate paid screener study for a really broad audience first. Then, you can privately invite only the actual managers to your main study. See, you remove the incentive to lie.
Now, during the implementation stage, the key is to build in multiple layers of defense against bad data. The recommendation is to use at least 2 different screening methods. So, you might automatically flag anyone who finishes a 10-minute survey in 30 seconds. And you'd also include specific attention check questions like, please select somewhat agree for this question to show you are reading. It just creates a much stronger filter for weeding out inattentive people and bots. And finally, in the reporting stage, the name of the game is total transparency. To make sure science can be reproduced, researchers have to report everything: what screening methods they used, who they kicked out and why, and all the details of their final sample. This is what allows other scientists to truly evaluate how trustworthy the findings are. So why should all this academic nitty-gritty detail matter to you? Well, because these studies, they don't just stay in academic journals. Their conclusions end up shaping the news headlines you read, the business decisions that affect your job, and even public policy. And that brings us to the real key takeaway here. Good science isn't just about the final result. It's about the process. Understanding the challenges of online data collection makes you a much more critical consumer of information. It lets you ask better questions about the data behind the claims you see every single day.
So I'll just leave you with this. The next time you see a headline that's based on a new study, will you stop and wonder not just what they found, but how they found it?